Hey guys, we are in section 4 of our unit over imperialism. And so today we're going to focus on really India becomes a British colony, because that ends up having some lasting effects for a very long time, including with World War I, World War II, and kind of the process of the Cold War a little bit later on. So let's get started. All right, so during the 15 and 1600s, the Mughal Empire presided over a powerful empire in India. By the mid-1700s, however, the Mughal Empire was in decline. When Mughal rulers were strong, the British East India Company gained only limited trading rights on the fringe of the empire, but that is eventually going to change. And so first they look at the exploitation of of Indian diversity. Even when the Mughal power was at its height, India was home to many different people and cultures. We like to lump India as one group of people, but there are dozens of different languages that are spoken, things like that. The British took advantage of this by these divisions by playing rival princes against each other. When local disputes led to conflict, the British stepped in. Where diplomacy or intrigue did not work, the British would use their superior weapons and simply overpower them. So that's kind of how they gained their foothold. They'd exploit how different they were for their benefit. And eventually you had the implementation of British policies. And so the East India Company's main goal in India was to make money, and the leading officials often grew rich. At the same time, the company didn't work to improve roads, preserve peace, and reduce banditry, because those things would cost the money that they were trying to make. British officials introduced Western education, legal procedures. Missionaries ended up trying to convert Indians to Christianity and things like that. One law banned the sati custom, which was a custom practiced mainly by upper classes. It called for a widow to join her husband in death by throwing herself on his funeral pyre, which basically means that if a male husband died, the female was expected to kill herself at the funeral. So they did ban that, which was good. But then you have some increasing discontent. You had the British take several other steps that deepened the anger with the British. The company had relied on Indian soldiers known as sepoys that it recruited for service. The sepoys had helped the British expand the control of India. As its empire grew, the British required sepoys to serve anywhere, either in India or overseas. Now, this became an issue because for some Orthodox Hindus, overseas travel was an offense against their religion. The East India Company, promoted by Indian reformers, also passed a law that allowed widows to remarry. And so these things were kind of going against religion, and that is a huge thing. If you want to cause hurt in a society, you need to go against the religion. The Sepoy Rebellion ends up taking place after this. Angry sepoys rose up against the British officers. The Sepoy Rebellion swept across the northern and central India. Several sepoys regiments marched off to Delhi, the old Mughal capital. There they held their last Mughal ruler as their leader. Other sepoys called on both Hindus and Muslims to support the uprising. In some places, the sepoys brutally massacred British men, women, and children. The British soon rallied and crushed the revolt. They then took terrible revenge for their earlier losses, torching villages, slaughtering thousands of unarmed Indians. So definitely did not a peaceful moment in history. Now, impact of the rebellion. The sepoy left a bitter legacy of fear, hatred, and mistrust on both sides. You still kind of see that in society today. Basically, you had the rebellion slow the reforms that had angered Hindus and Muslims, and then Indian discontent continued to feed growing nationalist movement. Indians were looking to try to create their own country again, and so Indian nationalists later called the 1857 uprising India's first war of independence. India under British rule. After 1858, Parliament set up a system of colonial rule in India, which became known as the British Raj. A British viceroy in India governed in the name of the Queen, and British officials held the top positions in the civil service and army. Indians filled most of the other jobs. With their cooperation, the British made India the brightest jewel in the crown of their empire, kind of a way to to like schmooze them, if you will. Now, there was an unequal partnership. Britain saw India both as a market and a source of raw materials. To this end, British built roads and impressive railroad networks, improved transportation that let British sell their factory goods across the subcontinent and carry India cotton. And so you had new methods of communication kind of come out of this as well. Britain also transformed Indian agriculture, encouraged nomadic herders to settle into farming, and pushed farmers to grow cash crops such as cotton. However, British policies resulted in peasants losing property, leading to a steady decline in the standard of living for most Indians. Clearing new farmlands led to massive deforestation, or cutting of trees, and other environmental disruption. You also had the strain of population growth. Today, India is known as this massive population center, excuse me, in the world. And because of these things, it's put a strain on food supply. Farmland that was turned over for growing cash crops instead of food ended up hurting this significantly. So you had a lot of famine sweep through India in the 1800s, and mostly that lower class is what was felt by this. Now, there was some benefits of British rule. The railroads, the communication, all of those things kind of helped push India from what was perceived as a backward country to a little bit greater later on, although definitely some stain there and some hard feelings there as well. All right, so diverse views on culture. Some educated Indians, impressed by British power and technology, urged India to follow the Western model of progress. The mostly upper-class Indians had learned English and adopted many Western ways. Other Indians felt that the path to freedom lay within their own Hindu or Muslim cultures. And so Indian attitudes. Early 1800s, Ram Mohan Roy combined both views. He was a great scholar. He knew Sanskrit, Persian, and Arabic classics, as well as English, Greek, Latin works as well. Roy felt that India could learn from the West. And at the same time, he wanted to revitalize and reform traditional Indian culture. So he's trying to kind of combine the two into one, which is a very difficult thing, but that was his push. So India condemned some traditions, such as the rigid caste, or Roy, condemned some traditions, such as the rigid caste distinction, child marriage, sati, and the purdah, which was the isolation of women in separate quarters. But also he set up educational societies that helped revive the pride in Indian culture, the art, the food, those types of things. And then you had some Western attitudes with this. The British disagreed among themselves about India. A few admire Indian ideology and philosophy. As Western scholars translated Indian classics, they acquired respect for India's ancient heritage. Western writers and philosophers borrowed ideas of Hinduism and Buddhism. On the other hand, the British people knew about Indian achievements and dismissed Indian culture with contempt. They thought they were less than. They didn't really worry about them as overall. This was, one British historian named Thomas Macaulay arrogantly wrote that a single shelf of English library is worth the whole native literature of Indian Arabia, which is a terrible thing to say. He did not appreciate the cultures around the world for what they are, and that view can set our historical community back significantly. All right, under British rule, a class of Western-educated Indians emerged. The British expected this elite class to support British rule. As it turned out, exposure to European ideas had another effect. By the late 1800s, Western-educated Indians were spearheading a nationalist movement. Schooled in Western ideas such as democracy and equality, they were determined to end foreign rule. So this idea kind of backfired. By the late 1800s, Indians, especially from educated class, were how do we change this rule? How do we get rid of this? In 1885, nationalist leaders organized the Indian National Congress, which became known as the Congress Party. At first, members of the Indian National Congress called for reforms of British rule. Over time, they called for greater democracy, and they felt they should allow a class of educated Indians like themselves to help rule the country. The Indian National Congress looked forward to eventual self-rule, but supported Western-style modernization. So they're pushing for that, but kind of holding back. Let's get all we can from them before we end up going free. And then you have the formation of the Muslim League. At first, Muslims and Hindus worked together towards self-rule. In time, however, Muslims grew to resent Hindu domination of the Congress Party. They also worried that Hindu-run government would oppress Muslims. In 1906, Muslims formed the Muslim League to protect the rights and interests of Muslims in India. The Muslim League initially favored British rule, but before long, it called for self-rule, as well as for Muslim-Hindu unity to achieve this goal. Eventually, by 1930, so not that long ago, members of the League began talking of a separate Muslim country, which has not happened. All right, guys, if you have any questions, please reach out. Talk with you soon.